Coach Lee Miracle from Campbellsville University, and you're watching Matburn.
All right, welcome to Matburn. Today we've got Coach Lee Miracle, otherwise known as Kayla's dad, head coach of Campbellsville University, and Jake Elkins. He's one of our top coaches here in Alabama, but he also took Corey Land to the World Championships and won a silver medal in Bulgaria during the same week of the Olympics, or the same week of Fargo. That's right, same week of Fargo. I knew the same week of something. Yeah, so we got two great coaches on the screen right now, but we would like to talk some Olympics, and since you happen to know a great Olympian, we could start with Kayla, but I know Jake's time is limited because he has practice to go to. And my other...
Good. I've got it mostly covered. They're going to get it started. If I have to step out, then I'll dismiss myself appropriately, but yeah, we should have a little time. We're good.
This could be the one practice that if you miss it, they don't make the Olympics. We don't know. So anyways, Jake has some really good views on, or insights into, why our Greco team isn't very good, and what happened to Kyle Dake. I think those are topics we should cover. But I would first like to start with you, Coach Miracle, and talk about your school. You're at Campbellsville University. You've been there since 2013, I believe. You have coached our best wrestler, Hannah Gladden, and but you have also coached Kayla Miracle, who is an Olympian this year for the first time, and we're super proud of her. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on how she did, and maybe you give us some insight on her reactions to this, because I haven't really heard any yet, and then we can get into everybody else.
Well, that's a loaded question. There's a lot there, but I'll try to unpack that a little bit by a little bit. But the first thing is I think Kayla is extremely proud to be an American Olympian, and I don't think that she loses sight of that. I think that she understands that there's a process, and of course we wish that the process would have allowed us to reach her ultimate goal this time. It didn't. And so we have to go back to work, and I think that that's what she's going to do.
Now, Kayla is still quite young. She's 25.
Yes.
And I met Kayla at the Pan Am Games in Colombia when I took Hannah down there. And I have to say that back then, I think she was probably 17 years old. She was a very impressive young woman. Compared to the rest of her team, she seemed extremely mature, extremely driven. I'm not sure if that has a lot to do with her. I believe she's been very independent since a young age. She seemed to travel a lot by herself, is what she told me. And I just want to see, because it seemed to me that she's a special kind of personality, and a special kind of athlete. And when those things are combined, you get an Olympian. But how long have you noticed this?
Well, like you said, she was raised very independently. All of the Miracle kids are raised that way. Self-sufficiency is something that I think that they should all learn to have. But Kayla also ended up going to Culver Academy, which is a leadership academy in northern Indiana, and it's probably the hidden gemstone of Indiana. It's an amazing place. And when I saw their leadership curriculum, as a Navy Special Operations father, I thought that's where I want my daughter if I can afford it.
Yeah, and she was quite successful there. She was the first girl to ever make the state finals against the boys.
Yep, she's the first and only girl to make the state championships for the boys wrestling tournament. Yeah,
that's super impressive. I didn't know all that. That's freaking awesome. Yeah, I have two daughters. They do not wrestle right now, but yeah, I can only imagine as dad how proud I'd be. That's pretty cool, Coach. Yeah, that's super cool. I had no idea.
What's her origin story? Like, when did she first get on the mat?
Yeah, this is a story that we've rehashed a lot, over the past few months. But the way I remember it all is a little different than Kayla and a little different than a couple other people, but I think it's all because of perspective. I remember the morning that we were fishing. We had went fishing. I remember the lake we had went fishing. We were trout fishing. We came back in my old Ford F-150, and it was foggy morning, and we were driving back from back onto the island of Whidbey Island, Washington. And she just said, "Hey, Dad, why can't I wrestle?" And that was the question.
Did you have a good answer for her?
I really did not have a good answer for her. And I'm not about crushing a kid's dreams or anything. And I didn't want to say anything negative in a moment, but I had had some girls come out prior to that, and they just didn't work out because they were there for the wrong reasons. But I said, I tried to postpone it, and I said, "Ask your mom." So I put it off. I saved myself in that moment. And of course, she goes home and asks her mom, and she says, her mom tells her, "Well, go ahead." And so here I am, stuck with it. And I don't know. I decided I just wanted to make sure she was in for the right reasons. Practices were very, very tough for like the next month. I tried to drive her away from it kind of a little bit. I wanted to make sure she knew what she was doing. And she just loved it. She ate it up, and I couldn't make it hard enough. And so, well, without driving a bunch of boys away. So I don't know. I ended up embracing it, and she won her first state championship when she was 4 years old. Kiwi, 40-pound. Awesome.
I guess you know that my daughter Gabby used to wrestle, and her story was when she was she used to come to practice with her older brother every day, and when she was 7, she used to sit in the corner like playing with their dolls. And then when she was 7 one day, she said, "Hey, can I go out and try it?" And I said, "Sure." And the very next week, she won her first tournament. And then Jake actually coached her in her state championship match. In her first year, she won her youth state championship match. So
I do remember all this 100%.
yeah, you remember the guy who told me that he would refuse to coach girls, and that I would have to start my own girls team. So I did. So
Yeah, you did a great job with that, Scott. That was fun. I was fresh back from college and coaching, and that was my first experience of that. And I was just kind of watching, and yeah, you did a good job with all that, Scott. It's awesome to see time play out how those things go.
yeah, I know you've grown to embrace girls wrestling, and Alabama's on the verge of sanctioning girls wrestling, but we haven't quite got there yet. But we do have some up and coming stars you should keep your eye on. So, anyways, just to follow up, the following year, after the Pan Am Games, my daughter had a poster of all the world team members, the junior world team members, and Kayla was up on her wall. So she was a big inspiration to my daughter.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I always love hearing that, of course. I have other fathers that have, daughters that have been Olympians and things like that. We talk. Larry Agello is a good friend of mine. We talk about just how special it is to be an Olympian, and then also the trials and tribulations that we go through to get there. And it's nice to be in a network of friends like, him, Scott Beck, Donnie Stevens, all those guys. I can always reach out and talk to those guys, and they understand what I'm talking about.
I'm sure you're familiar with a book called Perfected by Girls by Alfred Martino, I believe is his name.
I'm not sure of his name, but that sounds right.
Yeah. I read the book. It sounds exactly like Kayla's story. And when I asked the author, I emailed him to ask him, is this inspired by Kayla? He didn't deny it. So, you might want to get her that book, because it's all about her pretty much. I got that one for my daughter.
I think it was one of the books that I was lucky enough to be able to read early on, because they wanted to ask me my opinion on it. But I'm not sure, because there's been a few of those, so I'd have to go back and see which one it was.
Excellent.
Coach, that's pretty cool to hear you talk about just that network. You know, that's something that I know I value more and more in my role as a coach. I'm not dealing with it with coaching my daughters in wrestling yet per se, right? But with yeah, just finding a network of people that you can really relate to, right? Especially when you reach a certain echelon, you're doing things differently than you can't really talk to anybody your left and right necessarily, right? And you have to reach out and over time building that network. That's pretty powerful. It's cool to hear you say that in those terms, because I imagine that's a very that's elite company, you know, that's a small network, and so the value that's got to be just incredible.
Well, trust me, when you go through it, it's very valuable. JB Holmes' father lives here in town, and he reached out to me, and you know, he's been through it. He knows, and he's like, "Hey, I understand what you're going through. I'm here if you need me. You gotta love this community."
So did you coach at Culver?
I did, but I was a what do you call it, a volunteer coach. I was kind of always there, and I did some things for Matt Bailey. He was the head coach there. I was there at almost all of the meets that I could be at. I flew to a lot of them. It was kind of a crazy time in my life. I was really busy, but with the military and with Kayla and with everything else that was going on, Sean was at Blair Academy. So I was in the airplane, flying all over the place, myself, and a lot of times one of my EOD partners, you know, because I would take a Secret Service job just to pay for the trip, and we'd fly out to New York and drop off Sean at Blair Academy and pay for that trip, and then I'd go to Oklahoma City for the national championships, and I'd take a Secret Service job on the way there just so I could pay for that trip. But you just did what you had to do to make it work.
That's very interesting. And before, you know, obviously I want to thank you for your service, for being in the Navy. And I'm sure a lot of that discipline is rubbed off on your kids. When you got to Campbellsville, when you got the Campbellsville job, how hard was it to recruit Kayla?
Well, it wasn't hard because we had already agreed on it. I wasn't going to take the job unless she wanted to be there. So she had come down, she did a visit, she had kind of got to feel what it was like being here and know what it was going to be like in this town. And I made her kind of take some time and think about that. And she came back and she said, I think I still have the text. She sent me a text. I think it was like on a Sunday, and she was not supposed to respond until Monday. But it was something to the effect, and it was a very long text, so I'm summarizing. But she said, "Please take that job. This is an opportunity for you and me. I love the place. It feels great. Let's do this." So I knew she was on board, so it was an easy decision.
Good, good. How hard is it to coach your daughter at a collegiate level, you know, when she's the superstar of the team? And you don't want to ignore all the other kids on the team, but she's clearly the one who has Olympic potential.
Well, it is a challenge sometimes, but what you do is you walk around the room and you try not to completely focus on that. You focus on every individual group. And as you walk around the room and you do that, you're dividing your time. And if you stand in one place, you're going to be hard to divide your time equally among your athletes. So I really walk the room, and that's what helps me a lot. Yeah, Kayla's always on my mind. There's a extremely strong bond there, obviously, but in the room, I try to divvy up my time. And remember this, Kayla doesn't need me in the room as much as some of the other girls need me. So that's another rationale that I go with.
So do you make a conscious effort to not be harder on her, or to be harder on her than everyone else, or to make sure everyone sees the same treatment?
No, Kayla was always held to a higher standard because she was raised by me. If she wasn't raised by me, I wouldn't have held her to such a high standard. But because I raised her, she was. And she always was throughout college. And I think that she's very thankful that I held her to that standard, because if I wouldn't have been there to hold her to that standard, no one else would have been. And I don't know what would have happened, but she might not be an Olympian.
Well, I think you did a fantastic job.
That's so much to juggle. There's so many dynamics. I don't mean to interrupt, but that's just, I have to comment on that, Coach. I mean, there's literally so many dynamics and complexities there. You know, you're the head coach of this program. You have your daughter in there. Obviously, she has these literally world-class aspirations, right? And you have her mom probably to balance, and you're dealing with your spouse. I just can only imagine the other teammates and the people just wanting to. And it's a little different in a college room per se, right? You don't have parents and stuff around, but I mean, those college athletes are in tune with hey, there's favoritism or whatever. Like, it's just, that's as a coach, seriously, I mean, that's just a tremendous thing to balance. That's what I hear as you're saying that. It's balancing the father-daughter relationship and all the other complexities. That's pretty cool to know that. I did not know that part of her story. I just knew that where her success to this point, right? So that's powerful, man. That's the ultimate, tip of the hat to you for balancing those things. And it's one thing to have a daughter that's Olympian. It's quite another to, have raised them, coached them, balanced all those things while having a head coaching job. I mean, that's pretty freaking cool. That's awesome, Coach.
All I can say, I was very blessed. There was a lot of times I didn't think I was going to be able to handle it, and by the grace of God, I was able to. So
that's super cool.
I was going to ask.
Not all the days were great. There's bad days, but that's how coaching is. You have a lot of days of struggle to add up to a payday, and when you have that payday, it's very special. So you just got to look forward to those paydays.
Yeah, I was going to ask Jake the same question, because he has a superstar in his room, Corey Land, that he basically raised in the room since he was little. And, getting Corey ready for the World Championships, how do you pay attention to the rest of your room when you know this kid needs to get ready for Bulgaria?
Yeah, it's a lot, right? Some of that is credit to like the system that we use and the scalability, honestly, of our programming, not to plug, but like the scalability of like the ironclad formula that we use, right? But it's the same thing. You have to just consciously make laps around the room. You kind of coach. I always say, like, you coach the 80, and then you go find the 20, right? Your bottom 10%, your top 10%, and correct them, add habits, or somebody's fixing the wrong things with the bottom 10%, and then you're adding habits to the top 10%. So coaching the 80 makes that possible, but you wind up, you have to spend some time there. And in Corey's situation, I mean, everybody knows, hey, he's getting ready to wrestle at the World Championships, so nobody's like, why is he getting all the coaching or whatever, leading up to World Trials was, I would say, maybe more critical for like that balance, because we had a lot of athletes go into World Team Trials. And so I was way more mindful of it then. I felt like we still were very balanced in doing that. And, we always have assistants in the room and stuff on the mat, and we keep a pretty good ratio of coaches to athletes. But when he's getting ready to go compete at the World Championships, nobody's complaining when you're over there correcting something that he's doing,
Did you have other kids going to Fargo at the same time?
100%. Yeah, we had kids getting ready for Fargo and stuff. So they're all kind of doing the same thing, right? The challenge, honestly, was other kids needing a little more freestyle, some leg attack stuff. And if we're doing leg attacks, I'm like, hey, you're attacking, we're scaling it back to him for what he needs to do in that situation to accommodate.
Because he was in Greco, right?
Right. He was wrestling Greco. He didn't need, we're not going to be down blocking or hitting singles, right? So it was a little different.
All right. So a couple of years ago, one of my girls who wrestled for me went to Oklahoma City to wrestle in the Nationals. And she calls me up, or maybe it was the dad, and said, well, her first match is someone named Hope Miracle. And I said, well, and they were looking for advice. I said, well, I don't know what to tell you. Do the best you can. I wouldn't expect too much out of this match. So I know you got another one coming up behind Kayla, but I wanted you to kind of compare them, because Hope's still in high school, isn't she?
No, Hope's in college.
Oh, okay.
Hope has graduated, went into college, and she doesn't wrestle anymore. Which is kind of disappointing, but at the same time, she's chasing some other dreams. Right now, she is doing a 4-year degree program at Campbellsville, and she is doing it in 2.5 years. And she's also working full time at Ray Roberts Chiropractic here in town. So, I mean, she's doing great. I think that she's going to succeed no matter what.
Sure.
Wrestling is a big part of making her tough and making her able to do what she's doing today.
Does she spend any time with your team at all?
Yes, she spent a lot of time with the team. Most of the girls on the team know her, and then she's also at the university. So obviously the girls at the university know her.
Can you get her on the mat at all?
I probably could if I asked her to a little bit, but that's not her thing. I wish it was, because, gosh, she was so good.
Yeah, I have the same feeling for my daughter. She was so good, and now she's on the dance team. But she loves the dance team, and she's good at that too. So what can you do?
Yeah. And well, Hope ended up being a volleyball player, a really good volleyball player. And then, like I said, she's focused on academics right now. She's on the president's list with a 4.0, so I can't complain at all.
Now, I noticed in college that Kayla joined the cheerleading team.
She did.
Was that on her senior year, right?
I believe so. I felt so bad when she came to me and asked me about it, because I don't remember the setting really, but I think we were around the table or something. She said, "Dad, what would you think of me being a cheerleader?" And I just didn't think about it. And I said the dumbest thing I could have said. I said, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of." But I didn't know.
I would have taken all of me not to say the same thing. Yeah.
She wanted to be a cheerleader and be in a girly sport and do that. And,
right.
and that was what she wanted. And I said the wrong thing. Then she came into my office and said, "Dad, I'm serious about this. I really want to do this." And I said, "Well, that sounds great, as long as you're not the flyer."
Yeah, right. And when my daughter was little and she wanted to do cheerleading, I wanted to discourage it also. But I remembered something my mother told me, and you can use this, Jake. It's she said, "You don't cheer for boys. Boys cheer for you."
That's awesome.
Yeah, so she tried cheerleading for like one season when she was little, and she just didn't love it. So, but she loves it.
My youngest, I have two daughters. They're 9 and 10 right now, and my youngest one went to her first cheerleading practice 2 days ago. I took her to it, and so I'm on that same journey. I'm like, here we go,
Yeah.
Let's do this thing.
Good luck.
Yeah, I was like, I laughed. I showed up, and all the moms are standing outside, and they're in their routine. They're talking the language, or whatever else, and I'm like a fish out of water. And all I could think to myself is, this is how every single mother feels when they bring their son to my wrestling practice. Like this is the intimidation factor that's going on. It was just funny kind of being in that element. I'm like, I'm usually the person in there in the room, with the door behind the closed door, that I don't ever deal with the parents out here. It was just funny. It was an amusing situation for a whole bunch of reasons.
I think you need to embrace it. There's a lot of moms that get into wrestling.
True.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the journey. I'm in full support. I know it's actually kind of perfect, because I know nothing about it, and so I can just get to be dad. That's kind of to your story, Coach. Like being coach and dad, that's like the ultimate thing that I don't want. I was a pretty good baseball player, and baseball play and softball are definitely different. But I keep saying I want my daughters to play soccer, because I know nothing about soccer. I can show up, I can be supportive for their hard work. I'll get them a private coach, all the things, but like I can show up at games and just cheer in the stands, and I can never have to show up and coach them, because I like showing up and watching them. I don't want the pressure that I put on myself as a coach standing over my daughters too. And I just, I don't know, it's just a funny thing. So again, that's like maybe one of my biggest fears is having to coach my daughters. So a testament to your success.
It's a tough gig. And if you end up doing it, give me a call. I'll try to help you through it. I learned a lot. I made every mistake you can make. Okay.
I'll absolutely call you up on that one for sure.
Quick, funny story about soccer. So Kayla played soccer when she was a little kid, right? And it was interesting because we had to pull her out of soccer because she was playing soccer and she had scored too many goals. And the coach came over and asked me to ask Kayla not to score any more goals. And I said, if you don't want her to score any more goals, then put her at goalie.
Yeah,
because
well, I bet you'd be a great goalie too. So
Go. Yeah, there you go. Solution.
it was crazy. I was like, Kayla, score. Hey, if you score 5 goals, and I'm buying you ice cream, and she'd score 5 goals in the first, you know, she's a
she's
wrecking.
going for extra scoops. Yeah.
She was so aggressive compared to those other, little girls on the field at that time. I mean, she had won state championships by then, and now she's playing soccer with little girls on the field.
No, it's not fair at all. Yeah,
Fair at all. It wasn't fair at all.
that's
amazing.
hilarious.
I mean, I've seen wrestlers try other sports, and they look ridiculous. They look completely uncoordinated, but on a wrestling mat, they look like ballet dancers. So I have a few more Kayla Miracle questions before we get into the Olympics, if that's all right, Jake.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, following Kayla's career since the Pan Am Games, because she made such an impression on me, and I knew she was going to be huge one day. I saw that she transitioned to Kayla Miracle 2.0, and I didn't exactly know what that meant, so I wanted to find out.
Well, I think that was Kayla trying to redefine herself, being that she was one way, she was matured over a lot of different things, and then she came out as Kayla 2.0, and that's all I think it was. It was just a growth thing.
I thought it correlated to the time where she went off to Iowa to train. It was around that time, wasn't it?
It was around that time. So, I mean, that was when she was trying to, I really believe she was just trying to make herself be better than she ever was and commit herself and recommit, to what she's doing.
Okay, good. I personally didn't see anything wrong with 1.0, but
Yeah, I didn't either, but
so she got to the Hawkeye Club, wrestling club, and did she not like it there?
oh no, I believe she loved it there. That story's complicated, but the situation ended up being very simple. Her coach, Mark Perry, was going to go to Sunkist, was going to go to Arizona, and that's where she was going to go. And I think that the situation at Iowa at the time was a little bit uncertain, so I think it was the right move for her.
Mark was in her corner during the Olympics, right?
Yes.
Okay. The other questions I have are Olympic related. I want to know how she handled the loss. I assume that you have prepared her for these moments, but you don't see it on TV. You don't see it in the news. What a father says to a daughter, and
Well, Kayla's been through this before. Like I said, it's a step toward the ultimate goal. It's very rare that any of us achieve something so great that we don't have stepping stones. And if you look at Kayla's career, she would, qualify for the world team, not medal, then qualify again, and then medal. And, what I mean? It was just always a progression. And that's one of the cool things about Kayla is she's just continuously getting better. Now, of course, we were disappointed, and I know that she was disappointed. Her heart was broken, and it still is. And it's going to take a lot of time to get over that loss, but we know the process, and accepting the process is the step that you have to take in order to get there.
Sure. Yeah, I used to say to my son when he'd lose, which wasn't often like Kayla, but when he did lose, I would say, it's not the first time you've lost, and it won't be the last, but I want to know what you're going to do about it. And his answer was always go to practice the next day, and that's how he kind of shrugged off those losses. And he learned that a little bit earlier in life, striking out in baseball. It used to completely devastate him to strike out, and he'd check out on the bench, and he just couldn't console himself. And, then I had him start watching major leaguers and showed them how often Manny Ramirez struck out. And I said, it's okay to fail, but what are you going to do about it? And if I know Kayla, she's a what are you going to do about it kind of person. She's going to not let that kind of, there are some people who just can't get over their losses. You could see it in Jordan Burroughs during the broadcast. He seems still really unhappy that he lost to Kyle Dake. And he was trying to say the right things, but he seemed a little bitter, according to my perspective. I know that when he came to visit Jake and I in Alabama, he was really unhappy that Anthony Robles won MOW at the NCAAs instead of him. And it's like a year afterwards. He still hadn't gotten over it. He was really pissed.
Well, that's how champions are. I mean, when you put in the work,
Right.
you feel like you deserve it, then that's how you feel. If you don't put in the work, then you're not going to feel like you deserve it, and you might not feel so bad.
Right.
Yeah, there's an awesome book. You guys may have read it, Relentless by Timothy Grover. It's about Michael Jordan, right? And that's something that I always like recognize and kind of am like almost looking for in the most successful is that I almost expect it. Like I was saying, I was like it was like I had a microscope on everything that Jordan was saying and doing. I'm the biggest JB fan there is. I think he is Michael Jordan for wrestling, right? And again, the utmost respect. But I was looking for that. Like, where's the competitor in him, right? Like, and it's honestly, if he didn't have some bitterness in him about it, I would say that he's lost his edge. It makes me think that he's still going to be around. And you said something a minute ago, Coach, that I thought was profound. I try to explain this to my own athletes, and when I go to camps and clinics and stuff, but it's just not enough athletes are in that moment enough, or even sometimes coaches to recognize. But you said it's very rare in sports that we achieve what we wanted to without taking a step there, right? Like, and we kind of talked about this with Corey. People were asking me, him getting a silver medal, because he took the loss in the finals extremely hard. We were back there talking about that and stuff, and some of the other athletes too. But it's one of those things. I said it's kind of like finding out that you won $100,000, but they say, hey, you're going to get a chance tomorrow at $1 million, and you just start making plans for the $1 million. Like you immediately think about how you're going to spend it. So when you find out you only got 100, it doesn't feel like you won 100. It feels like you lost 900. And that, to me, I think that's just kind of the way champions think. And
right.
That's obvious. It's kind of obvious in sports. That's what we're talking about now. But I talked to some other really successful business people, and if they're talking about landing a huge contract or a huge sale or whatever, like, it's kind of the same thing. They expect the $1 million, but it's very rare that you really go from zero to that like that without having the stepping stones to be there. You know what I mean?
Corey's been on the team twice, and the first time he didn't place, and the second time he got silver. And you'd think to anybody else looking at it, that's quite an accomplishment and quite an improvement. But to him, he didn't get what he went for. He had the tools to do it, and he knows it. So he's just going to have to go back again and do it again.
That is the plan for sure. That is the plan.
That is the plan. I always found it fascinating that in the Olympics, the guy who wins silver and the guy who wins bronze both lose one match. But the guy who wins bronze wins his last match. And he must feel a lot better going home than the guy who wins silver.
For sure.
Yeah, that is pretty wild. Yeah, I haven't thought of it in those terms, but definitely.
Yeah, it must suck to lose that last one. So,
as a guy who's 0-time Olympian, I think I would settle for that at this point. I think I would deal with the repercussions of that loss if I had to.
Yeah. So let's get back to the Olympics. As a whole, our Olympic team did extremely well. We won 3 gold, 2 silver, 3 bronze, I believe, if I got that right. But our Greco team is terrible. They won 1 match. They didn't even qualify 2 of the weights, and of the 4 that went, they won 1 match. So, Jake, what is wrong with our Greco team?
Well, I mean, look, this isn't a secret, right? This isn't a secret. It's to the people that are involved. I mean, basically, look, we're so it's the American system, right? And I hear all these people being naysayers about this, whatever. Like we wrestle folk style in America. That's what we do. You know, there are very few places in the country to wrestle Greco exclusively. The best way that I can explain this is that Greco is like boxing, you know, and world class boxing is very different than the UFC, right? Than MMA. If you let me back before I jump into kind of that idea, I guess, or that metaphor. Kids are wrestling 6 to 8 months a year, folk style in most cases, right? If you do an even split, they're wrestling 6 months a year. There's a portion of people who wrestle 3 or 4 months a year. They wrestle their folk style season with a high school team, and that's it, right? That's really like the bottom tier. We're not really even talking about them. Everybody else is wrestling folk style, you know, from like with us, we wrestle folk style from August to April 1, you know, and then we wrestle freestyle and Greco from, you know, April, May, June, July, right? And that's only 4 months. And if there's an even split of that, then you have 2 months of training in Greco, right? In 2019, when we had our first trip, my first trip overseas, we had the cadet team, and I really like looking at the cadet team and kind of have like a passion for that, I think, because it's a good cross section of our development. You can see there who's coming down the pipeline and what it looks like. And in 2019, we had 10 athletes there plus 2 alternates, and we asked of the 12 athletes, we asked them to raise their hand if they had ever had a Greco specific practice. And we were asking questions, and we were realizing like they didn't know what we were talking about. So it kind of we like reduced the question down until we finally got to raise your hand if you've ever had a Greco specific practice. And 2 out of 12 raised their hand. 2 out of 12. I was like, oh my, and this is my first trip there. So I was thinking like, is this no? I mean, I had so many thoughts all at once, right? Here we are standing in the Olympic Training Center to go to Worlds. We've got a week of Greco here, and then we're going to take a week off and then travel overseas or whatever the timeline was at the time. And I was thinking, we are going to get slaughtered. Like we are taking cooks to battle, you know, like we're literally, we are not trained or prepared. And so this year there was way more experience on the team. The team had more success, everything else, but really, like you can't. There's no amount. I had a conversation with John Reeder the morning before we wrestled, and he was asking me about how I thought we were going to do, and I was basically telling him like, man, it's hard to say, you know, like the American Greco system has been based on these these like specimen of athletes to show up and be successful, and that's really what we've been banking on for success over the last decade. Because otherwise, like we're not really training them, we're not setting them up for success. Again, if you just follow the general model, right, and I think our club is a good cross section of what that looks like for clubs across America, is that they're going to wrestle freestyle and Greco for 4 months a year, maybe 5. But if there was an even split, which there's almost never an even split, they wrestle freestyle 80-90% of the time. And I mean, kids just don't know how to wrestle Greco is the deal.
Don't we have good success at the cadet and junior level in Greco? And
I think so. We've had so not always is the answer. I mean, we go to Pan Am's and slaughter people, but it's Pan Am's. It's not real hard, you know. And so, but at the world level, like not necessarily in freestyle, yes, because of the correlation and focus on freestyle. These American kids they're willing to work hard, like absolutely, you know. I mean, it's impressive the work that we get out of these kids. I mean, they grow up in a system of overtraining in most cases. If you're a really committed kid, they're crazily overtraining. They're training harder than Europeans are. They're just not growing up in a system that funnels them over the long haul like Europeans do, you know. And so where I think we're failing them is that we're not equipping athletes correctly. And so the metaphor that I've kind of used for that is you know, most of the athletes that wrestle are watching UFC fighting. Like that's just the kind of the culture that's coming up in America. And so I always tell them, I say, listen, when you guys go out there, there's a whole bunch of skills that are going to happen. There's different sports. So you're going to see boxing, you're going to see kickboxing, you're going to see wrestling, you're going to see jiu-jitsu, right? And if you take boxing out and you say kickboxing, like you're going to see all 3 of these if you simplified it to be kind of like folk style, freestyle, and Greco, right? But every time you watch a fighter, when they're doing a countdown for the UFC or you watch footage of these guys getting ready to train. What are they all doing? They're all boxing. They're all hitting mitts. They're boxing. They're throwing hands. And that's what Greco-Roman wrestling is. It's the hand fight sequence, right? And because that's where the game begins. I don't care if you're wrestling folk style, freestyle, whatever, the game begins with that. And so you need to study boxing to learn how to do MMA fighting. You know what I'm saying? You need to study boxing. And what I think is really significant, I've kind of told the story of Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather, right? It was like kind of a high profile fight that the average American saw, right? More so because when we talk about Greco-Roman wrestling, it's such a niche community, honestly. So I was trying to give an example that's a little more broad. And so you take the greatest striker in the UFC at the time, right? Conor McGregor, and you put him against an old, retired, and 30 pounds smaller Floyd Mayweather, and he got outboxed, And so I was watching Mayweather dodge punches, and I'm like, man, that's pretty impressive. Like, that's pretty cool. And my brother, who's sitting beside me, who's fought professionally and, boxes at a totally different level than my understanding, his IQ is worlds apart from mine. He's like jumping out of his chair, like oohing and on and screaming and river dancing on the floor because of something that he saw. We watched the same thing, but I didn't have the same eye for it, and because he understands boxing. I understand when he got hit hard and when he didn't, and some of the angles, like I know how to box a little, but nothing like him. And I think that's really the problem with Greco-Roman wrestling is it's like boxing. Americans don't want to watch boxing. We want to watch 4-ounce gloves and we want to watch dynamic explosions, and I think that we've got to help the wrestling community, coaches and athletes understand that, hey, you need to train this Greco stuff, but you need to train it in the same way that you're going to learn to box to do MMA fighting. You don't have to love Greco-Roman wrestling, but you should be studying this to benefit your folk style and freestyle wrestling. Like, it doesn't make sense not to do that, and when you put it in that context, we just have to translate Greco to the developmental athletes and junior high and high school, and especially to the high school coaches. I mean, they're really the champions of this information. That they're the ones who see the hundreds of thousands of athletes. It's not all those athletes aren't in the club. We should be going out, and every team of 50, 60, 70 kids needs a coach who's educated in this, because they all just say, like, I'm not a Greco guy, I'm not a Greco guy, and I've got a kid on 2 world teams, because I just started studying it, and I think that's why I'm so obsessed with it. Is I've seen the value to my own athletes, and because no one else realizes how little we're actually training those skills. They don't understand that the kids that we have here in Alabama aren't living this. I mean, we don't dominate their lifestyle like at the previous club where you and I got to know each other, Scott. Like, we give our kids a bunch of free time and let them be kids, but they're still developing those skills because of the overlap and the application of them, and
right. But we at the senior level though, we have Northern Michigan University, we have the OTC, we have WCAP, we have programs at the senior level that only focus on Greco, and we're still not doing very well.
Yeah, I think there's several problems. I think that they're behind. By the time that you get to that level, I think our senior level athletes are still behind. And to be honest, let me say this too. I'm not I'm not the expert enough to say this. So the opinion I'm going to share is based off the things I've heard from others. When I talk to Valentin Khalipa or Ivan Ivanov, like they're hypercritical of the things that they're doing at a senior level. I haven't really worked with Coach Lindland much personally at all, but below him, when I talked to Gary Mayab, who's an assistant at that level, Zach Dominguez, Lucas Stelt, Sean Sheldon, those guys, I believe in the work that they're doing. I mean, I see the way that they're committed to those things, everything else. I just think that our kids are so far behind. And I say kids, I think that our athletes are so far behind in their skill development that at that level, I mean, you're going against a guy. At that point, you're competing against Floyd Mayweather in boxing. You know what I mean?
I get
like you're so far behind over the 10, 12, 15-year journey that good luck, and I think that's what we're really seeing is they're just behind.
Lee, I think, one of the best things we do in this country is have our women collegiate wrestlers wrestle freestyle. and which is probably why they're so good. But it's a shame that we don't have our men do that. And but they seem to have success anyways. At that elite level, they can compete with the rest of the world. But I've been hearing rumblings for years about women's Greco. When is that going to happen?
I've heard a lot of rumblings too. We'll see. But kind of back to what he was saying, as far as how do we strengthen Greco? We don't have a scholastic system that promotes Greco. If you wanted to be a great NAIA school and start a program, start a Greco program. You know what I mean? A kid like Stefan Michi isn't going to come and wrestle Greco, right? But a kid like, a Greco lover is going to go to NAIA. So I don't know, maybe you split it up. Maybe you have some college programs that are just Greco and they focus on that. And I think that would do us better than what we're doing right now.
That would be great, because Northern Michigan, if you want to be on their Greco team, the only way you can compete is to get a passport and fly everywhere. And, basically they leave it up to each kid on the team to raise their own money to go to these international events, which is one of the reasons, Manny got a scholarship there, but he didn't go because, we didn't think we were going to be able to go to family members, every few months asking for more money and more money. It just seemed a little difficult to do.
We just need the same. The problem is, again, when I talk about the experience and the skills, is at the senior level, we're not. Internationally, Greco is king, man. Those these Russian countries, and I'm generically saying Russian countries because if you say the word Russia to an American fan, they're like, "Oh, Russia's incredible." Like they don't, if you give a specific country, you say Estonia, they're like, "Where's Estonia?" So when these Russian countries love Greco, it's king, man. It's crazy, and they love wrestling, but they specifically really love Greco, and that's something that I think I was not as in tune with, or I didn't understand enough until, spend enough sleepless nights staying up talking to these coaches overseas is how much importance they put on that. And if you're wrestling only Greco, if you're only training boxing, again, to use that metaphor, like you can't expect the best UFC fighter to come over here and be able to box with you. It's just not the same. There's so many intricate little feels and holes in the game and places where you can hide and hang out and places where you can attack and the other guy's vulnerable that we just don't have a feel for. And that's, you're seeing that at a senior level. And so the same way that we have, what I'm trying to contribute or as an outsider in the Greco program, I've been really blessed. The guys have asked me to be a part of their Greco-Roman innovation team, right? There's some really cool networking that's happening inside Greco, but like fundamentally, the United States has the same problem, domestic Greco versus international, that Scott, you're familiar with, and Lee, you two in Kentucky, even, that like these kids have to get out of their state to compete nationally. We have that same fundamental problem getting Americans overseas for that international feel. A kid who wins a high school championship in Alabama or Kentucky, maybe he could be the best kid in the country, but he might not even be top 50. He might not be top 250 because there's a bracket somewhere in there where you can hang out and survive. But if you go to nationals, that gets exposed and we find out if you really are the best kid or not, and I think that, I remember in high school thinking I won a state championship and I was like, well, I'm top 50, I'm top 50 kid in the country. And how naive that was. Right. And so, but we just fundamentally, we need to get kids overseas. And I think there's more conversation now than ever about that. And it's becoming more, practical. Like it's nothing for, we take family to, we go to Pennsylvania to wrestle in the Journeyman, and you're going to spend 4 or 5 days. And, you spend 4 days in a hotel, you travel there and back, whatever. Like you got $1,500 in your athlete. If you take your family, you got $3 or $4 grand by the time you went to dinner and did a few things. And for that same money, you can go overseas if you plan ahead and get a flight. Like you can go to Estonia and wrestle in their version of Fargo, and you had a vacation to Europe. It's like, and people are starting to figure out that makes sense. And I don't feel comfortable enough leading those trips myself yet, but we've talked a lot about like, hey, do we have to go to Fargo and spend 10 days in Fargo, North Dakota and be miserable? Like, what if we went to Estonia instead, or what if we went to wherever, to Sweden, and trained for a week and wrestled at the end of it, and you get to hang out in Sweden, like, that's pretty cool.
I totally understand your perspective. I was just actually asked to coach a team that's going to Estonia. And I'm probably going to do it because it's a situation where I get to be with a lot of young girls that are aspiring to be college wrestlers, and I can recruit. And it's a good trip. I mean, it's always a good time to go someplace else and see something else.
Yeah.
If you need any media coverage, let me know. I'll go with you. A lot of our Americans who ended up with bronze were very fortunate that the person they lost to made it to the finals. Unfortunately, Kayla was not one of those. Jakara Winchester was not one of those. But a lot of our guys were fortunate enough to get in, and then once they did, they succeeded. And I would use Kyle Dake as a huge example of that. He looked really un-Dake-like in his first match, and I didn't even recognize the guy on the mat. But then, once he got into the repechage, he turned back into himself again. And I know that Jake has a theory on this, but I was wondering what you thought, Lee.
Okay, well, this is what I think. And I have no knowledge, okay? But
that's what Jake said. He has no knowledge.
No, but or very, very little knowledge. I mean, obviously, I'm experienced in these kind of things, but I would think that
you don't have insider trading info, is what you're saying. Like, received. I understand.
I'm going to admit.
Nothing I'll admit you don't care.
I think if I were to guess, and that's all it would be, is that I'd say that Kyle was hurt. He was injured, and I would say that they had to deal with it, and they dealt with it. And then when they dealt with it, he was able to come back and do what he needed to do. And I think a lot of people, when they only have one match, can deal with a lot of stuff, and I could tell you stories about Kayla being there. I could tell you stories about her clavicle being dislocated. I could tell you stories about shots, and you do the best you can. And I mean, I've seen that girl compete through everything. And when you're not 100%, you're just not 100%, and you're against the best in the world. So it's a very tough thing to deal with when you're not 100%. And I don't think that Kyle was 100%. That's my opinion. And I think that somehow they fixed it, made it right, made it so you get through the next match, and he got through the next match. And it's probably because he's he's just a bad dude.
Jake's theory was a little bit different.
So, okay. So, Coach, I'm with you. We dealt with Corey had a broken rib. I think what you're saying is totally realistic. And if there's an injury, again, I don't know anything. Okay. But, and this could be so Corey had a broken rib leading into world team trials. We found out literally 3 days before the tournament he had a broken rib, the freak accident. And it, all of a sudden we were like kind of on edge, and I was afraid of some of the same things being his storyline. And luckily we were blessed. It didn't turn out that way. He had a lot of success. Right. But, we dealt with it with, I was extremely stressed. So we had world team trials, this long break between, and we had a pretty substantial weight descent for world team trials. And then there was like, I think 9 weeks or something between, and he's, we're talking about, pubescent boys, right? I mean, he's got testosterone flow in his body. He's really trying to grow all this growth hormone. And so he was more disciplined than anyone I've ever seen, any athlete I've ever been around, even in college, anywhere, with his diet. I was very impressed, but we had a really tough time. And so I was hyper stressed leading into Worlds about the 2-day weigh-in, because at World Team Trials, it's 1 day for Greco and 2 for freestyle. And we didn't wrestle freestyle because with the broken rib, we weren't going to make weight again day 2 and day 3, knowing that we were banged up, and it just wasn't going to be worth it, right? That we would be 80% at best, probably more like 60% after the weight descent. So I was very stressed about it. And again, I'm kind of saying all this to say that it could be confirmation bias, and I've asked myself, but leading into Worlds. Okay, so there's a if you're talking about the world level, you have to be playing with your water weight. Like you have to be pulling water off to be at the best. If you're not playing with your water weight, pulling that off, that bubble effect, pulling at your water table, pulling it off and putting it back on, then you're really undersized. I mean, everybody there's got single digit body fat, you know, in the men's division, right? It's a little higher with women, but I mean, you got to be lean. And so with Corey, we were pulling the water down. So okay, so let me back up. The premise to this is that they did a study at the Spanish Grand Prix in, I think, 2015, and they used an in-body device, which we use to regulate our weight descents. And what they found, they were testing it through in-body, but they used a couple other tools as well. And they found that if you're below a certain threshold of total body water, that you're 20% slower, weaker, and less explosive. Okay, so 20% is, I mean, it's like, okay, what does that really mean? Well, I always use the bench press thing, because if you took a high school kid and said, hey, you go from benching, if I could take you from benching 160 to 200, would you want to do that? And they're like, absolutely, you know. But if you take a kid and do that, and then all of a sudden you have him compete and he's dehydrated, he goes right back to his 160 bench press, even though you spent probably 3 or 4 months, you know, bumping his strength up to that level, right? So again, not that bench press is the best metaphor, but whatever. So I understand the value from deep study with the in-body team, everything else, of being dehydrated. And so we knew that he was dehydrated. So we made weight day one, and we're concerned about how much water can you put on before you have to, like what is the threshold, right? So I knew, hey, we need to put on, like, we've been drinking a gallon of water a day to be hydrated. We had inflated above that with water loading, but we needed about 8 pounds that we had pulled off to be 100% hydrated, relatively to what I thought. And so, but if you finish the day of wrestling and you had to pull 8 pounds off at the end of the day, it's going to affect you on day two, right? So we had to kind of play this game between, can we be a little dehydrated and be 80% day one? And these are just numbers, right? It's for the sake of discussion, but can we be 80% day one, or is it more important, and because we think we're good enough to wrestle on day two regardless, or do we need to be 100% on day one and then pull the weight off, have a long night of weight cutting to make weight again for day two, and possibly be 80% on day two, right? Because of this extra workload in the middle or whatever. And so, and again, I don't know how many people are really thinking about this, but I was stressed about it. I was deep in study over this, just trying to find any little tidbit of information that I could that might give us a competitive edge at that level. And I don't know if we did it all the way right. We did it definitely the best that we could, and enough that Corey had success. His success and did we do it right aren't necessarily the same, right? Like, maybe you could say there's a correlation, but just because he had a lot of success doesn't mean that it was perfect. And so I was thinking about that with Dake, because he looked sluggish. He looked slow. He looked lethargic in his day one match. Not just the one match. No one's immune from having a bad match, you know. But he had 2 matches where he definitely did not look like himself. And contrast that with day 2, where he looked like Kyle Dake again, you know, enough that he put it on Frank Chamizo. And I think that pretty universally, we all agree that Kyle Dake's skills are world class, maybe the best in the world. I would say top 5 pound for pound best skills on the planet. You know, I mean, he has incredible explosive wrestling, and when he's explosive, he blows through Americans. You know, it's just a different, I mean, Kid Dynamite, right, for a reason. And so the being dehydrated, you know, Corey is not all type 2 muscle fibers. He's a pretty good balance. I'm like type 1 muscle fibers. I'm very non-explosive, but I do well over the long haul, right? And so Kyle Dake, who is highly explosive, they found that being dehydrated has a greater effect on type 2 muscle fibers, which he is Mr. Type 2, right? And so I was watching that match and seeing him be slow and lethargic and just not playing the game the same. In match 2, I felt like he was behind, but eventually, once you get behind in the match, you start having to play the game a little different. You have to make different decisions than you would if the score is close, if it's 1-0 or 2-0. It's kind of like managing down and distance in a football game. It's kind of the story that I've been telling on it, right? All of a sudden, if it's 3rd and 13, you have a different play call might have to make a different decision than you would if it's, 3rd and 3. And so as it never felt when I watched the second match, the one that he lost there to I think Belarus, right? He eventually his decision making changed, but I felt like it changed because he was falling behind because he wasn't himself. And so I kind of laid out that to build the argument that I felt like, or I have a theory that they were gaming that, because I mean, who didn't think that Kyle Dake's wrestling for the world championship or for the Olympic championship, right? I thought we all had kind of assumed, and so it is the Olympics. You could lose any time. I mean, that's literally the toughest. I don't know what you can do on the planet that's harder than winning an Olympic gold medal in wrestling. Maybe climbing, Everest, but I don't know. More than 6 people do that every 4 years, so I don't even think that's the same, And so I think that he had to game it, and he did not fully hydrate to the level that he could have, because at his body weight, it might be 10 or 12 pounds of water weight. Wow. And then he's playing the decision of, do I want to have to pull 10 or 12 pounds off after I wrestle these 2 matches, before I have to, or 3 matches, whatever it is, I guess 3 matches, and get ready for day 2. So I felt like it was possibly being dehydrated, not because he didn't know he's dehydrated, but because he's playing the game of I've got to make weight again.
So if you take an injury and you're dehydrated, it's a recipe for a disaster.
100%.
Yeah, and how do you? First of all, when he said Dake's pound for pound best wrestler, you held up 2 fingers. Who's your number 1?
Well, in the U.S., obviously, I got to say Jordan and him. They're the top 2 wrestlers, and I think they're possibly the top 2 wrestlers in the world. It's arguable, but I mean, they're really awesome.
But Dake is coming down a whole weight class from where he normally wrestles, whereas Jordan, that's his natural weight class. So, I think it's harder for Dake to be on every time if he has to cut that much weight.
I would agree with that, but I would also say that that's a decision that you make as an athlete and as a coaching staff about what you're going to do and how you're going to make weight, because the rules. You got to make weight the first day. You got to make weight the second day. So when you know these things coming into it, how does that affect you? If you can do that, great. If you can't, then go up a weight.
What's Campbellsville's philosophy on weight cutting?
Get in the weight room. Get strong, get fit, and then we'll see where you're at. I hate weight cutting. It destroys the love for wrestling. I think that we should just focus on getting stronger and eating right, and then getting our body fat down to a right percentage, and then we'll decide what we need to do. But until you can even do that, then why are we talking about weight cutting?
What kind of we all are on board with that. What kind of athlete are you looking for? If we got Alabama girls watching, what kind of athlete do you tend to recruit?
I want girls that have a GPA that tells me that they're not going to struggle in college. I want girls that want to be part of a program that they have to wake up early and practice from 5:30 to 7:30 and to a national championship standard, and they want to be there. I want girls that want to be held accountable when they do things wrong. I don't want anybody that doesn't want that.
Okay, so their actual, like championships aren't as important as their character to you.
Their character and what they do every single day is more important to me than championships. If I have character, the championships come easy.
That's a good philosophy.
I would say that good people make good wrestlers, not good wrestlers make good people. If you're good people who, like you said, Coach, are doing the right things, they have good habits, they have integrity, they have work ethic, they have those things, like they're going to be good. It's a craft. You're going to get good at it over time if you're consistent and you're all those things. That's way more important than, we all know stories of really good athletes that are punks, and it just doesn't pan out. It never pans out, and there's no place to hide out in wrestling. I love what you said there, Coach.
Well, I love what you said. There's no place to hide out in wrestling.
Right. If there's one weakness for the U.S. team, it might be that we're too offensive minded. And if you can refer to Kyle Snyder's match in particular, I don't think Sadulayev took a single shot the whole match. I mean, he was just in great position all the time and just countered Snyder over and over. And sometimes I think we might be too aggressive.
Well, I'll just speak to that, to what we do here and what our philosophy is, and the system that we put in place is simply this. We do not sacrifice position for points, period. Position is everything. I don't know how you could even argue that you should sacrifice position over points.
And I think Snyder used to be that kind of wrestler when he was in college, and he's wrestling the heavyweights, and he's given up 60 pounds to these guys. That he was all about perfect position, perfect defense, and maybe going to Penn State has gotten him away from that a little bit. I saw him trying some ankle picks, which is not Snyder-like. But I guess you can't really argue with the number of medals we got as to whether the U.S. style is not good enough. Because in general we do pretty well. But I saw it in Kayla's match. She was the offensive-minded wrestler, and the Chinese wrestler just basically was waiting for her to make a mistake the entire match. And it always bothers me to see the wrestler who's getting after it not succeed. I don't like stalling. I hate stalling.
That's sort of the American way, right? I mean, we champion. I mean, if you go in every gym in America, the stands, everybody's yelling, "Shoot!" Shoot, take a shot. Like that's the American way. I mean, and
down block.
Yeah, I mean, what we really need is, like you said, it's positioning. And I tell the story of a match a lot of times using football metaphor about down and distance and whatever, but like you can't go out and throw 3 long passes and punt and you've had the ball in possession for 20 seconds, you can't just be aiming for touchdowns. You gotta manage the chains, you gotta be managing position to get there. And I mean, I don't know. You definitely got to have the ball, meaning that you have the other team reacting to you. You got to have your opponent reacting to you. You don't have to be taking shots. Taking shots and scoring points are not the same thing, but you have to be ahead in the exchange in kind of the conversation that's happening with energy between 2 athletes. You need them reacting to what you're doing. That doesn't mean that occasionally you have to fire off a shot or some type of attack. I hate to even call it a shot, but some type of attack so that they continue to respect they respect your threats, your attacks, right? A fake and a threat, or a fake and an attack aren't the same. You got to keep them under threat so that they're reactionary. And then from there, that's going to open up scoring opportunities. It's kind of hard for me to be critical of Kyle Snyder. I mean, that Joker's pretty freaking good, right? And he wrestled, Sadulayev, who, it's kind of hard to say whatever, right? But I mean, for that size athlete, Sadulayev has a feel that I think is same thing. It's marginal. It's not common. How often do you see a 97 kilo guy getting chest locked, and Sadulayev's got the feel there from coming up in weight and stuff that he obviously is comfortable there. And I think I saw some posts that he was battling injuries and stuff too, and didn't sound like he was probably trying to take a shot himself at all. But we definitely have to taking shot. We like just, I mean, man, we hate somebody who is stalling and wrestling so bad as Americans. It's so funny to me watching somebody down run the ball in the fourth quarter to run the clock out, or take a knee late in the game to win, and how we don't boo them in a football game, but in a wrestling match, if by God, if you're not taking shots, like, you're a communist, and I just think that we've got to value gaining position and scoring points over just taking shots. I mean, that's a low hanging fruit, and I think honestly, to your point, I think it's failing us a little bit. And but to speak specific, I don't feel comfortable speaking specific to Snyder's match losing to Sadulayev, because obviously that is what happened at some level. But I mean, when you're down and you got to have an attack, you got to have an attack. But unfortunately, he got burned twice with the same chest lock. I think that's more a testament to the guy that he wrestled has superior skills than the guys he was low singling in college, or hitting attacking below the knee in college against those heavyweights. They don't have the feel of chest like you,
right.
like Sadulayev does. So
Sadulayev had a great game plan for Snyder. Yeah.
He's pretty good himself, so.
Yeah, he is. I think we lost Lee. Oh, there he is. Came back for a second. The John Smith complained a lot about the refereeing. I was wondering what you guys thought of the refereeing, especially I know there was a little controversy in Kayla's match.
Well, here's what I teach my kids. If you leave it so close that the referee gets to decide it, then it's your fault. And I've always been like that, and I still believe that.
Yeah.
There were 4 calls in that match that were 50-50. It could have gone either way. And yeah, after you see them on video, they could maybe go another way more definitely. But I'm just not like that. At the end of the day, we got to take control of the match. We should have won that match. We should have attacked more. We can't blame anybody for that. We got to win that.
Right. Same thing with Helen Maroulis. She lost a match 2-1 because they put her down twice for passivity. Or put her on the clock twice for passivity. A lot of people were saying that was completely unfair. You're supposed to do it once per person, right?
Yeah, so some of that I dealt with. I fielded a bunch of questions from people asking, especially in Greco, which again is way more misunderstood than the freestyle wrestling. But and I basically was kind of explaining to people that look, there's a certain game that's going on. This referee, if there's not points going on the board, they're gonna there's kind of the story of a match, and it's interesting because there's a couple different storylines, and you have to figure out what is this referee trying to do. They're trying to conduct a match and get points. They want a clearly decided winner. In some cases, there were some matches where I was like, hey, again, there's positions that got scored, and I'm like, I don't know how I agree how it got scored, or it could have gone both ways. There were some that I thought were bad, but in general, I felt like a lot of the criticisms that I was hearing from fans or in coaching groups or wrestling groups online or whatever was people not really understanding the storyline of the match. Hey, there's not action. Sometimes they'll put the more aggressive wrestler on the clock first because they think that either you're going to score or worst case you get penalized this point, and then I'm going to put the more passive wrestler on the clock second because when you get a point, you're now all of a sudden you're winning. If it's 1-1 and you got the last point, you're winning, right? So they're deciding that based off the rule set a little bit, and you kind of got to figure out what's this referee trying to do right here? Because I think we all.
It feels like the referee is trying to manipulate the match. If you follow the rules, the more passive wrestler should be put on the clock, right, or be put down in Greco. And John Smith was bewildered every time they would put the more aggressive person down first. But if you're watching the referees, it seems like they're rewarding the more aggressive wrestler with the first going down first so that they will win a tiebreaker.
Yes. And so as the match goes on, that it could play out different, right? But early, I think you just kind of have to identify what's the guy, what's the referee trying to do? And ultimately the referees overwhelmingly, I'm not saying there's not some corrupt officials or whatever, but they don't really want to decide the winner, they're like, hey, hey, you're on the clock. You're aggressive. I'm putting you on the clock. And then when you're clearly the aggressor, overwhelmingly, you're doing 80% of the work, and they put you on the clock first, and he's going to give the other guy his dues in the second, right? And so if it's necessary, if it's not necessary, then he won't do it. You're winning 5-1 or whatever, 5-0. But if necessary, they tend to play that out. And if they don't, now all of a sudden you have a gripe, right? But again, like Coach said, and again, man, homage that you have that opinion, and that's obviously what you preach, Coach, and the fact that you're sticking to your guns about it, giving your own daughter in the Olympics on such a stage. But if the referee's deciding the winner, then you didn't, and that's kind of what we taught the athletes. All of our cadet athletes getting in the world is listen, if you don't score points, you have zero rights. You have zero rights if you didn't score offensive points. If you score 2 point takedown or a turn exposure, and they put you down twice, well, you still win because you had the only two, you know.
Mhm.
But if they put you down 3 times, now all of a sudden I'm going to get on this. I'm going to go berserk, right? That like this official's putting you down passive and you have the only offensive points in the match. Now you have a gripe, right? But until you've scored points, I mean, you have zero rights out there on that map, you know. After that, the referee's he's gonna start to penalize people until somebody gets aggressive and decides a winner. And I think if you kind of understand the spirit of that, then it's easier to watch what's going on. And again, not that that's, I mean, in Kayla's match, same thing. I was like, man, those some tough ones, you know. Like, I hate to be on the losing end.
It was hard to understand from the perspective when she took the shot and then she drove the girl out of bounds and then she didn't get one there, and that's a coin toss. You know, it could go either way depending on the ref, depending on everything. But that's coin toss. And then they put her on the shot clock after that. Now, in all fairness, the Chinese girl attacked her, and that was, a legitimate attack. Kayla countered, but then Kayla came back and attacked her. So, I mean, I don't know who do you put on the shot clock? If it's me as the referee, I put the person on there that hasn't attacked last. But,
all right. Well, Coach, I know that I promised you a 45-minute show, and it's now like twice as long, and you got friends over there waiting for you. But I do appreciate your time. Do you know when Kayla's coming back to town?
Yeah, she'll be here on Thursday.
Thursday. Is there any way we can get her on Matburn? Because there's a girl here named Evelyn Holmes. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's our rising star girl athlete. And I have promised her that she could interview Kayla. So if we could get her on when she gets back, I'd really appreciate it. And thank you very much for coming on. And
no problem. I'll ask her and see what she thinks. But I'm sure she'll do it. She's awesome. You know that.
I do know that. Yeah, I do. I don't want to assume anything because I know she'll probably be very busy when she gets back. So there's no hurry in doing it. I'm sure she has a lot of people she needs to pay attention to. But she does have a huge fan here in Evelyn Holmes. And it would be great if she could get to meet her and talk to her. And you should keep an eye on her. She'll be a freshman this year, I think, in high school. And won our state championship 2 years in a row now. So she's an up-and-comer.
Coach Miracle, is awesome being able to connect with you a little bit. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to, before we all hop off, I wanted to tell you thank you and appreciate what you're doing. And again, enjoyed the chance to connect with you, Scott. Thanks for putting us together and having us on. This is always fun to talk wrestling with some bright minds. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for skipping your practice for us, Jake. Appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
All right, Matburn out.
See you guys.